Sabrina Monarch here of Monarch Astrology and Magic of the Spheres podcast. I'm going to be talking to you about the full moon in Cancer that is coming up. So let me just share my screen and show you the chart. This is set to the time in Greece. It will be a little after midnight on January 14th. On Eastern time in the States, it'll be at 5:26 p.m. on the 13th. So there's some different evidence, some different things I will bring up to make this point, but this full moon looks painful. It doesn't look like fun. And that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about is that vibe, right? And how to be with it. Offer my suggestions on that. And yeah, so just naming that up front. Maybe this is like very Capricorn of me to just be like, all right, like got some tough things to talk about. But then the moon Mars conjunction here, we have Mars retrograde in Cancer and a full moon conjunct the Mars retrograde. And Mars retrograde already being a very challenging transit, which I'll talk about more today. But then we have Chiron in Aries squaring the lunation. So bringing up some type of wounding or healing journey. And then Uranus, edgy, nervy, breakthrough planet that relates to trauma and evolutionary astrology, is forming a harmonious angle to both the sun and the moon, which suggests that there may be, like, while the nerviness might be high at the moment, there's also a lot of space for breakthrough. So more on the what I'm delivering here. So the full moon in Cancer is exposing us to some very difficult, rough emotional waters. And this could be, for some people, it might be more very present, like really going through it. Maybe for other people, it's just flavors or edges that have like a stingier, more painful quality to them as we build toward this full moon. Full moons are always characterized by peak emotionality, but this moon's in Cancer, so it's extra emotional, and then it's also conjunct Mars retrograde. So emotional reactivity, emotional heat, emotional pain, things that hurt, kind of fitting in this category. So then we also have in this chart, Venus is currently exalted in Pisces, which is a lovely transit, but she is applying toward a conjunction to Saturn. So at the moment, there's maybe some difficulties or barriers that we're experiencing in relationship to like a higher pursuit of bigger love, pleasure, a sense of the transcendent or sublime. And then we also have the North Node at the last degree of Pisces joined with Neptune. So at the same time that there's this kind of painful quality of the full moon, there's like, I think maybe a lot of heaviness existentially or disillusionment in the air. And with that, the possibility for healing breakthroughs around acceptance, forgiveness, and maybe even some encounters of the ecstatic or the sublime. Like, I've been very dour so far. It's not my normal vibe, but Saturn, is a little bit melancholic as a planet. We're in Capricorn season, which is ruled by Saturn, but Saturn can also relate to, inside of solitude or inside of this kind of isolated, like almost hermit-like space. Saturn can kind of pave out these different channels in reality. And sometimes when we go so deep into our own, reflection, introspection, internal winter, we will meet these pockets of sublime ecstasy. So I don't know if everyone really knows this about Saturn, but there is kind of like a melancholic, prone to ecstasy vibe with Saturn. So I'm thinking about this also in a recent video about Saturn and Pisces that you can find on this channel, just a few videos back. I'll leave it linked in the notes. I explored why Pisces, as a sign that has a lot to do with redemption, challenges us to find redemption in exactly what we find unredeemable. So it's possible that we're currently processing some content, surface memories, right? Cancer Cancer as having to do with nostalgia and memory and past, or current events that hit on old memories. This content comes up that feels difficult to swallow or digest. For me, like I grew up in LA, not those exact parts that were burned, but many of those places I'm familiar with. So having all these images come in of a place that's familiar to me in flames, felt very kind of connected, right? Like there's something Mars and Cancer about that. Some astrologers have been interpreting the fires as, part of Mars retrograde and whatnot. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but just kind of, I noticed that with the images of the fire, that being connected to my, where I grew up, and other things that were just compounding in my experience or inner world, I was like, this is a difficult moment. This is a difficult vibe. What's happening with the astrology? If this sounds really trite to talk about it this way, I'm sorry, but like just inside my own experience of like feeling these hellish, nightmarish kind of threads, difficult feeling states, I decided to look at the astrology. And sure enough, this, full moon energy is what I was looking at. So feel free to disregard everything I'm saying if you're just like, I have no idea what she's talking about. But I have gotten a sense from who I've spoken to and like what I'm, picking up on the field is like we're all living our lives in different, we have different seasons and arcs of whether we're in a good state or things are going well or things are difficult. But I do think there is an added element of strife in the air right now, not only because of collective events, like the variety of collective events we could be talking about, but the Mars retrograde energy and this building full moon that is highlighting the Mars retrograde. So it's not like a big leap astrologically to suggest the vibes aren't good at the party right now. So the last summer when the sun was in Cancer, I wrote something about the archetype of Cancer that I want to share and resurface. So I'm not just going to go on about how difficult or bad the experience is right now, because that's not the only layer to it. And I'm not just going to leave you there in that. Okay. So here's what I wrote about Cancer. I've been wondering about this duality of Cancer. On the one hand, how it represents the deep goodness of life, an idyllic, perfect bond between mother and baby, eating ripe fruit in the summertime, secure attachment, and the wellspring of generative emotions that arise from that, fertility, warmth. On the other hand, Cancer scorned grows wrathful, passive-aggressive, petty, manipulative. It scuttles along in the shadows, gossiping, hating, complaining, absolutely unreceptive, eager to shred anything to pieces with bitterness and cynicism. So putting that together was big for me when I was thinking about Cancer, of just like, how is this one archetype that's both like the deepest goodness of life and that feeling of peak light in the summer and secure attachment and idyllic bond between mother and baby and feeling safe and feeling good and feeling loved, how is that also connected to this like scuttling in the shadows, petty, hateful, complaining, just like completely like anti, like not in life, like so in love with life and connected to life in, the principle of life, and then also just closed off from life. Hold that for a moment. And I'm going to share something. Let me share my screen and I'll share a really annoyingly long quote with you guys. This is from The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. And the book, after the introduction, this is chapter 1. It begins with, "Life is difficult." So for anyone listening, I'm quoting M. Scott Peck here. Life is difficult. This is a great truth, one of the greatest truths. It is a great truth because once we truly see this truth, we transcend it. Once we truly know that life is difficult, once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Because once it is accepted, the fact that life is the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. Most do not fully see this truth that life is difficult. Instead, they moan more or less incessantly, noisily or subtly about the enormity of their problems, their burdens, and their difficulties, as if life were generally easy, as if life should be easy. They voice their belief noisily or subtly that their difficulties represent a unique kind of affliction that should not be, and that has somehow been especially visited upon them, or else their families, their tribe, their class, their nation, their race, or even their species, and not upon others. I know about this moaning because I have done my share. So he goes on. Another thing I want to highlight in his quote, beginning here, what makes life difficult is that one of the process of confronting and solving problems is a painful one. Problems, depending upon their nature, evoke in us frustration or grief or sadness or loneliness or guilt or regret or anger or fear or anxiety or anguish or despair. These are uncomfortable feelings, often very uncomfortable, often as painful as any kind of physical pain, sometimes equaling the very worst kind of physical pain. Indeed, it is because of the pain that events or conflicts engender in us and all we call them problems. And since life poses an endless series of problems, life is always difficult and is full of pain as well as joy. So he goes on to say that this, we find meaning, we grow spiritually, we grow mentally, we grow as humans, our spirit grows as we face the challenges and move through our difficulties. And that a lack in wisdom occurs when we fear the pain that is involved so much that we avoid problems, that we procrastinate, that we try to pretend they don't exist, that we just avoid everything. So why did I share that with you? Because, main point, this idea of the idyllic life principle that Cancer represents, this part of us that wants to feel like we belong, that we are safe, that we are loved, that we're having this more idyllic or wonderful experience. The kind of fruit of life in that way is not just something that you get to extract purely in separation from all the other stuff, that actually there is kind of there are some difficult experiences, pain, feelings that go into the soil, that become the plant, that offer that particular fruit of what we privilege the most in life. And I think that we forget this a lot. It's often a human impulse or tendency to delay opening to life or being truly present with our experience until the conditions are cozy enough. Unfortunately, while this posture of protecting ourselves from feeling pain and the pain of difficult experiences is successful at blocking out the pain, it also begins to numb us more generally. We also lose opportunities to move our emotions by refusing to be present with them, and we end up growing harder or more bitter and expressing that second half of Cancer that I was talking about in the quote of mine, because we just end up being basically emotionally constipated. This is so deeply culturally ingrained and normalized from every family that encourages no one to cry until people stop feeling their tears at all. To any culture that stigmatizes sexuality, for example, giving this hard line, tough, just be abstinent thing to teenagers, even though they're having this whole chemical hormonal experience. Just stuff that down. It's not, don't act on it. Don't listen to it. Right. And this Capricornian approach, basically, of just hold it together, just get it together, just be tough, don't be bogged down by these things, do what you're supposed to do. It's like, you can see why this is a social thing. It keeps us going. But don't we need at times to just be able to handle social life without collapsing into chaos? Like, getting it together can be convenient. On the other side, though, what is often missing is the Capricornian counterpart to holding it together, which is the guidance on how to fall apart. Most people will not feel their emotions all the way through unless they feel safe to do so, whether that structure and facilitation is self-guided, like you have built the safety inside of yourself to feel something, or if it's someone else holding space for you, or a community, or some kind of, group or something. The facilitation, the support that happens in relationship and community. And I'm devoted to like self-care and holding myself and building a deeper relationship to myself. And I marvel at how much deeper I can go oftentimes when I'm being held, when someone is holding a space for me to feel something. And that space holding is Capricorn also. So why I'm going on about this a little bit is that it's this very human tendency to protect ourselves from experiences and feelings we don't want to feel. It's a socially normalized thing to avoid a lot and get it together, put up an image, or be a person in a certain way. And we suffer personally and collectively for these things. And at the same time, we also need our relationships. We need our embeddedness in community. We need our connection that helps us ground in feeling states, that help us process grief, that help us move through things. Because a lot of these things, from a developmental perspective, we don't come into this life able to survive alone. And we don't, as children, have the fully capable nervous system to process feelings by ourselves. So there is an interdependence with other people where we, collectively learn or don't learn how to feel. So perhaps you have some resources already and you can simply use them. Like, I have a lot of tools, and this time period has still been really hard, or bringing up things where I'm like, this is an evolutionary edge for me, the content that I'm being asked to feel. And there's some excitement or, increasing vitality in that. And it's hard at times, and I'm definitely not doing it alone. I think that the emotional currents of the moment can be a wake-up call that some deeper holding or support is needed. Again, whether that's something we are developing in ourselves or in relationship, or a mix of both. And Capricorn is a really strategic sign that can find footholds on the mountain to just get ever higher. And why I bring in that image is that the first layer of support may be accessible already. Even if it's not like top of the mountain status or something like that. And so just looking for like what's relevant and available now, instead of thinking that what's relevant and available now isn't like good enough, because then we never take that first step and we don't start the journey. We do have to start somewhere, and with time and practice, we can gain more footholds, skill, ease, and ability. There's a real grit to Capricorn, and like this sense of maturation or trusting time and being willing to put in the hours and the work and whatnot. Another thing I want to talk about is feeling versus dwelling, because this isn't just a message to feel your feelings. Sometimes we mistake that for just looping around in our egoic mind mechanisms, right? Like, and I know this one well too, because when I can't get over something, or I'm ruminating about something, when I'm looping about something, that's always a sign that like the deeper thing isn't being felt. You're circling around the drain, but you haven't gone down and felt the thing fully yet. I made a video about this previously, about Mars in Cancer and the energetic of emotional calcification versus emotional breakthrough on this very thing. Because I do think that at the moment, life is helping us to have an emotional breakthrough instead of circling and looping. and pretty much everyone, and I can't think of anyone exempt from this. I think it's just human that people will have feelings or inner content that's very difficult for them to touch or access by themselves. And they'll have a journey in getting to know themselves or getting to relate to themselves of being able to be with material that hasn't been easy to access, or people might avoid that their whole life too. But if you're willing, if you're in pursuit of this deeper connection to life and with yourself, you probably have noticed that there's places that are just hard for you to go. And that's really normal. Sometimes we don't open some material because we don't trust ourselves with it, or we don't feel we have the resource with it, or we're in survival. And so we kind of wait for the right conditions. It's a little paradoxical here, because in some sense this can be a weakness of Cancer as an archetype, to just try to be in the comfort zone all the time. But there's also a reality that a seed underneath the ground, it won't sprout, it won't burst through the husk of the shell seed until the conditions are right for growth. So it's up to us to lean into or move toward conditions that foster our growth. And sometimes those are Capricorn is the power that we have to endure winter, to endure hardship, to go without, to delay gratification. And sometimes it's in that frame where we're like, wow, I'm really out here. Like, I don't have what I need, but I somehow still have the energy to put my foot in front of the other and like get to higher ground or get somewhere where there is resource. And then once I get to that place, I'm going to take this heavy bag off my shoulders and I'm going to like warm up by the fire, and then I'm going to start processing my emotions. But while I'm out here in the snow, I just can't do it. Right? So it's really actually a matter of wisdom and personal responsibility, to find where we actually have access to a better circumstance for our growth. Sometimes we don't have options, and often we do. And so it's also discerning if we're blocking our own options because we're just like, no, I don't like that, or that's not it, or whatever. And we're just resistant, right? Like, we have to be really honest with the Capricorn Cancer axis about just resistance patterns and our ego being like rigid versus where there's space to actually parent ourselves, create better conditions, open to a better life. Anyway, I'm going to stop with that tangent. But as I was saying, like, there's things that are difficult for us to feel. And even if you're super willing, like even if you're down to do inner work in something, there can be places where our defenses from feeling are so tough. And that becomes something that we're in this kind of journey of de-armoring, of creating a new kind of safety for ourselves, where we are able to unpack or able to let down a certain defense and be with something. And part of that is also acknowledging the validity of those defenses, which were constructed at a moment in time when they really were needed, and they may have really gotten us through difficult times or helped us out in life. I want to share a few things from Ariana Felix, the Dream Mommy. I loved this post of theirs on Instagram about Mars and Cancer. So, reading from Ari Felix, quote, "Forget about your winter arc. The alchemical arc is where it's at for dreamers this season. Mars and Cancer will cut through and reveal every untreated cause of dis-ease. They will pinch you with 1,000 needles until you reawaken to your agency to shape reality. None of this is a punishment. Only you can punish yourself for wanting more than survival, for wanting to belong, for having needs and feelings, for abandoning yourself, for all the things you have yet to forgive yourself or others for." Mars is an alchemist interested in helping you create momentum toward your desires. There's no time for carrying too much baggage when working with Mars, which is a part of what we understand about why it has fallen in Cancer, the environment with the memory of the moon. Mars has a lot to cut through in the place where everything is held and remembered. It may not appear to be a compassionate process, but Mars is devoted to your freedom, not your comfort. The compress of compassion becomes your responsibility to make and apply. But also, what is more compassionate than setting someone free? End quote. I'll leave the link to this in the notes, but I thought this was absolutely brilliant. Just kind of in reiterating here that the emotional feeling tone of this Mars retrograde in Cancer and the full moon conjunct it is possibly quite painful and touching on very sensitive spots that we really don't want poked. And the thing there being, what happens when we lean into the emotional current that is trying to complete itself, right? Like when we really let ourselves feel an anger, for example, that then informs a new boundary or a sense of what we want or a sense of our personal power. Or we let ourselves really open into a grief, which then lets us stop ruminating in a certain way and get into a deeper level of acceptance or open our heart or be more available for life again. There's a way that emotions support a process, but that when we stall the emotion, that it acts more like a trauma or a defense in the body, more like a scab or something, or an open wound that feels like anytime something touches it, it's like throwing salt at it. And how, yeah, this dynamic of how we're being pressurized into being with things that we would maybe rather not be with. So another thing I wanted to share along these lines is that, say you are on a path of living into your joy or excellence or your soul, and how having those kinds of deeper principles or ambitions, if you will, spiritual ambitions, it will bring stuff up. It brings up material. If you've ever intentionally worked on becoming more happy or loving or compassionate or more radiantly embodied in your purpose, chances are you also met all the parts of you that were opposed to doing that. And there's a difference between then putting all those things into shadow and not letting yourself be human, and then also the process of having compassion and empathy for those parts of you, but not just being run by them either. The current astrology, while I have been focusing on the edgy and painful elements of it, has not excluded layers of fun and playfulness and joy, like these moments. Or that might be the main characteristic of your experience. But I'm noticing at least the tenderness of the co-presence is highlighted. Like how attachment, like actually feeling really safe with Cancer is, I mean, the shadow of that is the fear of loss or something like that. I was also thinking about the sacral chakra, sacral energy center, and how it's about pleasure and sexuality and fun and play. And it's also blocked by guilt or shame. And so if you've ever noticed yourself or others get preoccupied with difficult feelings when just trying to enjoy themselves or yourself or just trying to have a good time, I think that this happens for people, you know, if they're in the pursuit of living a more pleasure-filled life, a lot of grief or shame or guilt will come up. And it's not even necessarily so conscious of like, I feel guilty to feel good. It might just be the haunted memories of maybe people in your lineage who suffered and didn't ever feel that good or something like that. Or your own past painful memories and just that feeling of like, well, how can I open to everything feeling so good when I know or I'm familiar with such pain? Like there's this kind of guilt thread that goes with it. So philosophically, I've been reflecting lately on how the deepest joy doesn't really happen in a vacuum. It doesn't exist in isolation, and it doesn't require perfect circumstances or the lack of pain for it to exist. It is a feeling state in a web, an interconnected web of everything. The more we love, the more tender we are with life, the more actually aware we are acutely of what we have to lose. So it just made me think about like reflecting on ways to be in relationship with impermanence, right? Or like the vulnerability of feeling, even the good parts of life, as opposed to being more invested in our defenses from feeling the ups and downs of life. So high level, some philosophy on the pain of this moment, because yeah, I don't know how many videos I make where I'm just focused on emotional pain for this long, right? Like just sitting with that concept. But Mars retrogrades work to pin us to spots that we don't normally have to face or confront. Mars retrogrades really can be like an internal evolution around how we relate to conflict, how we relate to anger, how we relate to fear. Any of the dense Mars experiences, just like what's our relationship to it? You know, like how often do we actually sit with and face our fear versus how often are we trying to control things so that we don't have to feel afraid? Or, you know, like, and inside or, you know, not facing certain parts of ourselves that we don't want to be with, again, investing in the defense mechanism or the avoidance strategy. And I think that Mars retrogrades just create like the little perfect storm or the perfect conflict in life to have us actually be confronted with something that we otherwise usually get to avoid. And at the moment, I believe that's happening with emotional states, like just being confronted. You know, Ari used the image of the 1,000 needles, right? Like that kind of onslaught of feeling that feels inescapable. That's happening despite whatever story or circumstances bringing that feeling state to our awareness. And if you could slow down the coping strategy or the action plan that normally covers up the emotion, what would it just be like to be with the feeling where it lives somatically? What amount of it can you feel safe opening to? Those can be very extreme, intense, kind of dilating moments when we tune our attention to something that we usually escape or avoid. And it can be really powerful to go slow in that and to build safety with it. Also, can you practice having a kinder frame toward yourself when you're struggling or in pain? As a lot of us self-punish when we are struggling or in pain. We like kick ourselves while we're already down. And it can be really hard and so transformative to build up our internal love that we have available to turn toward ourselves and others when we are in pain. Not many of us are taught that this is practical or relevant in any way. Like we get a lot of conditioning that, you know, don't feel those things and like do something about it, like fix it, make it better, control the environment so that you never have to feel that way. Like push it away, solve the problem out there. But then we end up spinning in this like frenzy of trying to manage and control this pure like life force chaos that we're not okay with it being there. And so it can be really radical actually to cultivate a relationship to that chaotic space of emotions and to be initiated and dilated and opened into life, like the thrumming life force, the thrumming force of nature that comes through our bodies in the form of feelings. So we might find new awareness in ourselves or inspiration around how to participate with our lives if we make even the tiniest, maybe quantum, but don't underestimate the tiny adjustments into the adjustment out of coping and avoidance and into presence and connection. So yeah, just to bring this back, it's like Cancer is about embrace. It's about the hug, right? It's about closeness and intimacy. It is also sidestepping, can't like crab. There's a kind of avoiding or passive aggressive or passivity element to it. And you know that kind of like cliche people that are close, whether partners or siblings or friends, being like, what's wrong? And the other person being like, nothing. And just closing themselves off, being like, get away from me. And how there's disconnection in that moment, right? Like it's not a clear like why I don't want to let you in. There can be many different stories or whatever for that. But that energy basically of like something's irritating, something's bothering me, I'm sad about something, I'm having an experience, I'm having an emotion, but like I'm not gonna relate to it. I'm not gonna hug it, I'm not gonna embrace it, I'm not gonna let it be okay that it exists. I'm going to sidestep away from it and avoid it. And the amount of pain and collateral consequences that that causes over time through generations in culture. And the micro shifts, the radical internal, personal, and shared relational shifts toward presence and connection, building the skill, the value system around being with what is, right? And inside of that, also that radical opening or transformation in terms of being with the experience and developing the skill or capacity or bandwidth, titrating perhaps, the way that as we touch into a deeper encounter with life, with nature, with eros, with the chaos of the emotional realm, that it creates a natural inspiration or change. It opens up possibilities for us of where we have courage, capacity, willingness to take up space in our lives in new ways, to make changes, to separate from things, as opposed to going in the same loops and the same circles. So I hope this was helpful. I meant to say at the beginning to please like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what resonated with you. But after a few days of just sitting with these different waves of like, whoa, this is hard to feel. And I'm like calling my support people for help sitting in those feelings and just being like, what is going on? And then looking at the chart and thinking, maybe I can turn this experience that I've been having internally into some type of offering. And I don't always name that that's what I do because I don't have to tell you that I've been experiencing that personally. The astrology will speak for itself. But I do find something spiritually inside of the recognition that we literally are all interconnected and we're all in this together. Yeah, like, and I think, like a more idealistic part of me, I feel like there's so much potential, there's so much life inside of our experiences, good or bad, right? And that we're really just learning here on this human journey, like how to, this is something I teach in regards to like the soul and evolutionary astrology. The soul is evolving through being embodied and having emotional experiences. And so there is like an erotic current that brought us to exist in the first place. And there's such a breakthrough possibility inside of these learnings that we have in our lives about how to be present with what is in our experience, as well as that really strong resistance pattern to just avoid, look away, not be with. And I'm finding more and more passion, interest, enthusiasm personally around like learning these skill sets that I practice or can share with other people about how to be more present here. I think it's revolutionary in a kind of way because culture is a conglomeration of people and families and messages that are passed through our social interactions. And yeah, I just I like didn't expect that I was going to go on this random tangent at the end here, but there's been so much conditioning to just not trust life, and life is so sensational and at times so painful that we develop these mechanisms, like we learn how to protect. And I just think it's also really important as a culture that we talk about deconditioning, or building different types of resiliency that aren't just like cloaking ourselves off from encounter. And these things go so deep, they run so deep, and the breakthrough that we get when we're really with it and really guided by self or in community and relationships, guided into this deeper relationship with life, it's just like there is this whole new world. It is very birthing energy, which is also Cancerian. So I'm just going to leave it here. And again, do leave a comment. Let me know what resonated with you, how you're doing, if you have any thoughts or takeaways from this. And I'm going to end it here and just wish you lots of support and love during this full moon and all the possible activations or experiences or tenderness that it's bringing up.